migrant shelters may begin downsizing, including the shelter out on Randall's Island.
That shelter in particular, lately known for quality of life issues and a spike in violent crime, but that's about to change.
It sure is, because after months of pressure, the city has decided to shut down that particular facility, which is one of the largest asylum shelters it operates. But while local activists applaud the closure of this facility, since the city says it's no longer needed as U.S. border crossings are down, critics say that the shelter was not only illegal to set up, but also had high levels of gang activity taking place inside. But one thing's for sure, the closure of this 3,000-person facility means everyone living there is going to need to be relocated to physical buildings like hotels.
The Randall's Island Migrant Shelter will permanently close by February next year. The Randall's Island Shelter has been the site of numerous violent crimes. Police even raided the shelter looking for weapons and also dismantled some tent encampments set up nearby.
We need to not have mega congregate tent shelters. That's just not appropriate. It's not safe. It's not healthy for anyone. We want to make sure that people who need shelter are getting appropriate shelter in our shelter system.
The Adams administration didn't go into further detail on what that means and if they are going to be removing the tents, but insisted that these types of encampments are illegal, despite the fact that the city put up porta potties next to a sort of makeshift market.
Tents have got to go. That's the message from a community group pushing to get a migrant shelter off of Randall's Island, and they are threatening legal action tonight.
When you see some of the hypocrisy of people who are saying, bring us your tired, your weak, your huddled masses yearning to be free, but not on my block.
So after gangs were discovered operating out of New York's most controversial shelter, its eventual shutdown was all but guaranteed. But what nobody's talking about is this massive facility. It wasn't just controversial because of the levels of criminal activity taking place inside. It housed 3,000 people, which critics said was too many. And it also cost $10,000 a month per person to operate. Now, of course, people's lives are worth infinitely more than that, but this shelter, which was supposed to be a humanitarian refuge for thousands fleeing poverty, it became everything except that, and it's still going to remain open for half a year, which means the gangs who've been documented infiltrating this facility will get to keep using it before it shuts down. And while it's being shut down, everyone who lives there is going to be relocated to the city's other shelters, many of which are in former luxury hotels. But that's not controversial because the city's got many vulnerable people living here which need a place to stay and aren't gang members. But while they're closing it down, claiming that our demand for shelter space is lower than it was, they're also shopping around for 14,000 more hotel rooms to use as part of their emergency housing system, which seems to indicate that the asylum crisis here isn't drawing to a close. Instead, it's slowly becoming the new normal here in America's largest sanctuary city. And that brings us to the real reason why closing this shelter is not the immigration-related victory that some people say it is. Because New York's had shelters open and close in the past, yet the right to shelter policies that mandate their existence, those aren't going anywhere. And critics say that means the asylum crisis in this city could continue for a long time. Because even if the U.S. shuts its border down completely and nobody's allowed in, millions of people are still experiencing humanitarian disasters outside of our country. And although the majority of the 200,000 asylum seekers who've come to New York are well-meaning and are here for the American dream, a small but active criminal element has disguised itself and entered the city along with them. And because this is a sanctuary city, critics say that allows the bad guys to live out their evil fantasies while the city unknowingly takes care of them. And as you're about to see, until New York fixes that problem, the real crisis that destroyed many of the places these asylum seekers are fleeing, that's gonna remain. Only it's gonna be right here in New York, waiting for them. So there's something very strange going on with the asylum crisis and this Randall's Island shelter, because every single week, 700 to 1,000 people arrive in the city looking for a place to stay. And a lot of them ended up getting a place to stay at Randall's Island. And 2 months ago, there were so many people living in this facility that a tent encampment had sprung up outside of its doors, full of people who were no longer allowed back inside as they'd been evicted after their temporary shelter stays were up. That's how our system here works. Our shelter stays expire before they actually get around to help.
You know, it's tough living in New York City, and you see these headlines about the migrant crisis every day. But, you know, I was watching this Cash Jordan video about the Randall's Island shelter closing.
Oh, yeah.
And it just, like, got me thinking, you know, is the city, like, I don't know, is their heart in the right place, but their head somewhere else?
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really is. This shelter is almost like a perfect example,
Mhm.
a microcosm of the whole thing.
Right.
We know that New York's been struggling to house this influx of asylum seekers, but this specific shelter closure
Yeah.
kind of raises some questions.
It does. It really does. Because on one hand, they're saying it's closing because border crossings are down, less demand for shelter space.
Right.
And then on the other hand, they're out there scrambling, like trying to find 14,000 new hotel rooms for emergency housing.
Yeah.
It just seems like something's not adding up.
Yeah, and I think that's where Cash Jordan's reporting adds a really, really crucial layer to this whole story. Because he points out that a lot of this decrease in crossings is partly due to Mexican policies, which is something that's completely outside of New York City's control.
Yeah.
So even if this shelter closes, it's not like the problem just magically vanishes.
Right, exactly. And then on top of that, it's not even like Randall's Island was like this huge success, Like, remember that figure of $10,000
Oh, yeah.
per person per month?
Yeah. Wild.
To keep that thing running? It's like, that's more than some families get for an entire year in rent assistance.
It's an insane amount of money.
And it makes you wonder, like, where is that money actually going?
It's really staggering when you think about what Cash Jordan found about the conditions inside, too.
Right.
Quality of life concerns and a spike in violent crime. It really wasn't a haven by any means.
Well, and then there was also that police raid, remember? Yeah. Where they found weapons, like, right there and then, like, just nearby, these tent encampments were getting dismantled.
Oh, wow.
It just felt like at that point, things were completely spiraling out of control.
Yeah, it really felt like, I was reaching a breaking point. And this is where I think the whole right to shelter dilemma gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because in New York City, they're obligated to provide housing to anyone who asks.
Yeah.
But Cash Jordan's video kind of shows the flip side to that policy. People ending up living in abandoned vehicles after getting evicted from shelters because, their temporary stay ran out.
Right.
That doesn't sound very helpful, does it?
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like, it really is. And it makes you think, how effective is it really to just provide a bed for somebody without really addressing the bigger picture?
Yeah.
Like, how are these people actually supposed to get back on their feet with no support system, no resources, and, basically a ticking clock?
And that's why I think Cash Jordan's perspective is so valuable here.
Yeah.
He doesn't just report the facts.
Yeah.
He talks to the people who are living this reality. Like, he interviewed a migrant who said that he understood why people resorted to illegal vending.
Oh, well.
Because they just have no other options.
Yeah, I mean...
Desperate times call for desperate measures, I guess.
Speaking of desperate, we kind of have to talk about the elephant in the room here.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the criminal activity.
Right.
These reports about this violent Venezuelan gang using this shelter as like a base of operations for citywide crime.
Yeah.
That's pretty alarming.
It really adds a layer of complexity to wanting to help vulnerable people.
Yeah.
You also have to think about ensuring the safety of the city.
Yeah.
It's a tricky balance.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And then remember, too, they were talking about the stolen mopeds. Turns out those were connected to that gang.
Oh. They were using those in-purse snatchings and robberies all over the city. This is not just like some contained issue. This is spilling out into the streets.
Yeah, it really highlights the real-world consequences for everyone.
Right.
Not just the people living in the shelters.
Exactly.
And there was one thing that Cash Jordan said that really gave me chills. The police can't even enter these shelters to investigate without specific warrants.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It just sounds like some kind of legal gray area that could potentially protect criminals,
Right.
Like, what if these shelters are basically immune to law enforcement?
Yeah.
Where does that leave the residents in the surrounding community?
It raises a lot of questions about accountability and unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Even when we're trying to do the right thing. It makes you wonder, is this right to shelter actually doing more harm than good? If it's like creating a space where crime can actually thrive, that's something we really have to grapple with, I think.
We've been talking about the shelter closing like it's like the end of the story, but you said it earlier, like this problem doesn't just go away.
Yeah.
And Cash Jordan reports that around 700 people are still arriving in New York City every single week needing shelter.
It's a constant influx.
Yeah. So I think that's where we need to kind of shift our focus a little bit.
Okay.
Because it's not just about the physical space, right? It's not just about the beds and the hotels and the shelters. It's about creating a support system that actually helps these people,
Right.
that helps them become self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just shuffling people around without really addressing the root of the problem.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Cash Jordan's video so powerful,
Yeah.
because he forces us to ask that question. Is the current system, even with all the good intentions, is it actually trapping people in this cycle of dependence rather than empowering them to actually build a new life?
I mean, this is where I start to feel like I'm losing my grasp on the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's tough.
Like, is New York City doing more harm than good by perpetuating this system that just seems to struggle to help these migrants?
Yeah.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
It's a very complex issue.
Yeah.
And it's okay to feel a little overwhelmed by it.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's important is that we're asking these tough questions,
Yeah.
because the answers aren't easy.
Right.
But by asking the questions, we can start to understand.
Right.
And hopefully start to make a positive change.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. We really are just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
This whole Randall's Island situation.
Right.
It's just one piece of this massive puzzle. It's complicated.
Yeah, it feels like every time we kind of pull back a layer, we find like a whole new set of challenges.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, it's kind of a lot to wrap your head around.
And that's exactly why we're doing this, We got to dive deeper. We got to look beyond just the headlines and what politicians are saying.
Right.
And really kind of engage with all these nuances.
So where do we even begin? If closing shelters isn't the answer,
Right.
and just throwing money at the problem isn't working,
Right.
what are we left with?
Well, Cash Jordan has some really interesting ideas in his video. He says that we need to move away from just managing this crisis as it's happening.
Okay.
And start thinking about long-term solutions. So instead of just reacting to the immediate needs of the migrants that are arriving, we need to create systems that will empower them to actually become self-sufficient.
Okay, I like that. So it's not just about giving people a handout.
Right.
It's about, giving them a hand up.
Exactly. Think about job training programs, support for learning English, maybe legal aid to help them figure out this whole work permit thing. Stuff that will give them the tools they need to build a life here, a sustainable life.
That makes a lot more sense than just keeping people in shelters forever.
Right.
But realistically, can a city like New York, I mean, they're already stretched pretty thin.
Yeah.
Can they actually afford to put these kinds of programs in place?
That is the million-dollar question. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Cash Jordan makes a really compelling point. He says that we can't afford not to do it.
Okay.
Think about it. The longer this system keeps people dependent, the more it's going to cost us in the long run.
Oh, I see. So it's not just a moral thing, it's an economic thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking about a cycle of poverty.
Right.
It doesn't benefit anybody.
So we're actually saving money in the long run by investing in people up front.
Exactly. It's not just about the money, though.
Right.
There's a human cost to all of this. Imagine how tough it must be.
Yeah.
To be stuck in this limbo. You can't work, you can't contribute, you can't build a future.
It's got to be demoralizing.
Absolutely. And Cash Jordan's interviews really bring that point home.
Yeah.
These people come here looking for a better life.
Yeah.
They want opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they end up stuck in a system that feels like it's holding them back.
Right.
Yeah.
And that actually brings us back to the right to shelter policy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a good idea at first, right? Make sure everybody has a roof over their head.
Sure.
But as we've seen, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah. And, Cash Jordan brings up a really, really good question.
Okay.
Is this policy kind of setting people up with false hope?
Well,
Giving them a sense of security, but without the support they need to actually thrive.
so it's like we're throwing them a life preserver, but not teaching them how to swim.
That's a great way to put it.
And then we're surprised when they're struggling to stay afloat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if we're actually hurting them more than we're helping them. Are we creating a cycle of dependence instead of encouraging people to become self-sufficient? It's a tough question, but we need to ask it.
And speaking of tough questions, we got to talk about security.
Oh, yeah.
These reports of gangs operating out of the Randall's Island shelter?
It's a big concern.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. how do we create a safe space for these vulnerable people?
Right.
And also make sure the city is safe. I mean, that's a tough balance.
It really is a balancing act.
And then Cash Jordan mentioned this thing about the police needing warrants to enter shelters.
Right.
That just adds another layer of complexity.
Totally. On the one hand, you want to protect the rights of the people living there.
Right.
You don't want shelters turning into police states.
Right.
But you also have to be able to address crime,
Yeah.
and you have to do it quickly.
Right.
So I think communication and collaboration are key here.
Okay.
We need a system where the city, the police, the organizations running the shelters, they're all talking to each other, sharing information, working together to figure out how to handle these situations.
So it's less about pointing fingers and more about working together to come up with solutions.
It's about nuance and understanding.
Yeah.
Not just reacting without thinking.
And it's not just about the people in charge, right? It's about us, too. We need to be informed.
Absolutely.
We need to be engaged.
Cash Jordan talks about how misinformation and fear can really shape how people see this whole issue.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely seen that. Like these narratives that say all migrants are the same and they're to blame for all the city's problems.
Right.
It's frustrating because it just creates more fear and division.
Exactly.
It doesn't help us understand each other or find common ground.
And it makes it so much harder to have productive conversations about solutions. We forget that we're talking about real people.
Right.
Individuals with hopes and dreams, just like us.
It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines and forget that.
Yeah. There are real human stories behind the numbers.
Right.
And those stories matter. They help us understand what's really going on.
Yeah. And they remind us that these are people who deserve our empathy.
Exactly.
It's not just statistics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about long-term solutions.
Yeah.
Balancing safety and compassion.
Right.
The importance of communication and collaboration.
Yeah.
And how misinformation can really mess things up.
Right.
What else do we need to understand about all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, I think we have to acknowledge that there are things happening outside of New York City that are affecting all of this.
No.
Things the city can't control. Like Cash Jordan said, the decrease in border crossings.
Right.
That's partially because of what the Mexican government is doing.
Oh, okay.
So this crisis is global. What's happening here is connected to all these other things going on in the world.
It's a reminder that this isn't just a New York City problem.
Right.
Or even a U.S. problem.
It's bigger than that.
It's global.
Yeah.
And it's caused by all these complex things,
Yeah. Geopolitics, economic inequality, climate change, the list goes on.
So that means solutions can't just come from New York. Right?
Exactly. We need solutions that involve everyone.
Yeah.
Countries working together, international organizations, local communities, all of us.
So we need to stop thinking about things in isolation.
Yeah.
And start recognizing that we're all connected.
Exactly. We can't just build walls and pretend the problem will disappear. We need to work together.
It's a big challenge.
It is.
But it's also an opportunity, right? To think differently about how we approach immigration, to create a world that's more welcoming.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And it starts with understanding, with empathy,
Yeah.
with listening to each other, and with being willing to question our own assumptions. That's what I love about Cash Jordan's video. It makes you think.
It definitely has me looking at this whole thing in a new light.
Good.
But with so much to consider,
Right.
where do we even begin to find solutions?
Well, I think the first step is to
just admit that there's no easy answer. There's no magic solution that's going to make everything okay.
You're so right. It's tempting to want that,
Oh, absolutely.
Like if we could just find the one right thing to do and everything would be fixed.
Right, exactly. But this is way too complicated for that.
It's messy.
Yeah.
And there's so many factors involved.
Yeah, and honestly, after watching Cash Jordan's video, I see how much the current system is failing.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I have no idea where to go from here. How do we actually make things better?
Well, I think one thing that Cash Jordan's report really highlights is that we need to change our whole approach.
Okay.
I've been so focused on just dealing with this as a crisis.
Yeah.
But we need to start building a system that actually works, a system that helps migrants stand on their own 2 feet.
We talked about that before, right?
Yeah.
Like providing job training and language classes and legal aid and all that.
Right, exactly. All of that is super important. But those are just pieces of the puzzle, right?
Yeah. Right, yeah.
So how do we put all those pieces together? How do we create a system that takes care of people's immediate needs when they arrive,
Yeah.
but also helps them build a future? That's the real challenge.
It's a huge challenge. It feels almost impossible.
It's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's impossible. I think one key ingredient is going to be collaboration. We need everyone working together.
Okay.
City officials, community organizations, nonprofits, maybe even private businesses.
Right.
We have to create a network of support that actually works, something that's efficient and actually makes a difference.
Yeah, because it feels like right now there's this disconnect
Totally.
between the people making the policies and the people who are actually living this reality.
Yeah, like the people in charge need to be listening to the people who are actually being affected by these decisions.
Exactly. And that's why I think what Cash Jordan is doing is so important. He's giving a voice to the people who are often ignored.
Yeah, he's putting a human face on this whole issue.
Right, because it's easy to forget, you know. Oh, yeah.
We get caught up in the numbers and the statistics, and we lose sight of the fact that we're talking about real people.
Real families.
Real families with real hopes and dreams. And those dreams are getting crushed by a system that seems designed to keep them down.
It's true. And it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. And that number, 700 people arriving every week.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if we're even asking the right questions. Like, is it enough to just provide shelter?
Right.
Or should we be focusing on creating opportunities?
I think that's the fundamental question.
Yeah.
Are we okay with just managing this crisis?
Right.
Or do we actually want to solve it? Do we want to help people build new lives? Or do we want to keep them dependent on a system that's not really working?
I mean, those are really hard questions, and I'm not sure I have the answers. But I think we have to admit that what we're doing right now isn't good enough.
I totally agree. We have to be honest about that. The first step is acknowledging that things need to change. Okay, but what does that change look like? Like, what would a better system actually look like?
Well, I think it would have to prioritize helping migrants become self-sufficient.
Okay, so it's not just about meeting basic needs.
Right. It's about investing in programs that give people the skills and resources they need to actually succeed.
Okay, so that's the job training and the language classes and all that.
Exactly. But we can go even further.
How so?
What about cultural orientation programs?
So interesting.
Mentorship programs, where people can connect with others who have been through similar experiences?
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe even support for starting their own businesses.
So it's not just about helping people survive, it's about helping them thrive.
Exactly. And it's about more than just providing services, It's about creating a sense of belonging, helping people feel like they're part of the community.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, about changing the narrative.
Totally.
We need to stop seeing migrants as a burden and start seeing them as people who can contribute to our society.
Because they can. And when they do, everyone benefits. We get a more diverse workforce. Our culture becomes richer. Our communities become stronger.
But we can't forget about the safety concerns either.
Oh, absolutely not.
That gang activity at Randall's Island was really disturbing.
Yeah, it's a serious issue. And it's something we need to address head on. But I think it requires a different approach.
Right.
We need to build trust between law enforcement and migrant communities.
Okay.
We need to work with community organizations to prevent problems before they start. And we need to make sure that shelters have the resources they need to handle security issues effectively.
So it's about being proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that safety is about more than just locking people up.
Right.
It's about creating a society that's just and equitable for everyone.
And I think a big part of that is changing how we talk about this issue. We have to stop with the fear-mongering and the scapegoating.
Yeah.
We need to start seeing each other as human beings with shared experiences and shared hopes for the future.
Beautifully said. And I think that's what it all comes down to, recognizing our shared humanity.
Yeah.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
It really has. It's made me think about all of this in a whole new way. And I have to say, it's given me some hope.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, because it feels like there are solutions out there.
There are. But we have to be willing to fight for them.
Right. We have to demand better from our leaders.
And from ourselves.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. This has been a really important conversation.
It really has. And the conversation doesn't end here. We need to keep talking about this.
Absolutely.
We need to keep pushing for change. And we need to keep believing that a better world is possible.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks again.
Thank you.